Welcome back to Scrubbed In, the DVM Journey, the podcast where we dive into the wild, rewarding, and sometimes unpredictable world of becoming a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. I'm your host, Grace Gaynor, a current fourth-year veterinary student at the Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine. Whether you're an aspiring vet, a vet student, or just passionate about animals, this is your backstage pass into becoming a DVM. From classroom to clinic, we're sharing the insights, tips, and real-life experiences to help you thrive on your journey to becoming a vet. So scrub in, and let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Scrubbed In. I'm your host, Grace Gaynor, and I have to say, today is a beautiful day for the podcast. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping, and I am lying in my bed, so it really feels like all is right in the world. I hope that wherever you all are today, you are having an amazing day. Today, I'm continuing our how-to series when it comes to getting into veterinary school, and today I wanted to talk to you all about how to ask for letters of recommendation, or LORs. Obviously, this is an important topic and a very big part of the veterinary school application process, but it's not only useful for veterinary school, but beyond that, for applying for veterinary scholarships, and for me presently, applying for jobs. So let's get right into it. First, let's talk about why letters of recommendation matter. A lot of you are probably wondering, how much weight do letters actually carry, especially for veterinary school applications? And the answer is, it really depends on the school. And I think that a lot of us don't know for sure. But we do know that many schools look at veterinary applications holistically. So similar to the personal statement, which we have talked about previously on the podcast, the letters of recommendation are just another way for you to stand out apart from other applicants. The next question that a lot of people ask is, what are admissions committees actually looking for in a recommendation letter? For me, I think it boils down to a couple things. First, competence. I think that this can be shown in a multitude of ways depending on who you ask, but the admissions committee want to know that whoever is recommending them thinks that they're competent and will succeed in veterinary school. I think they're also looking for the recommenders to show that the person that they are writing the letter for has a strong work ethic, because we all know that that is required to succeed in veterinary school. I think depending on who is asked to write the letter, they may be looking for something like academic aptitude. So if you were to ask a professor or something like that, they're hopefully looking for someone who is diligent about their schoolwork and studying, and that makes them more likely to succeed in veterinary school. And then finally, I think that if you're going to ask a veterinarian, the admissions committee is also looking for that veterinarian to show that they approve of you as a potential colleague in the field. Is this someone that these veterinarians would want to work with in the future? And when you ask that veterinarian that you know, which is required for vet school applications, they want to see that that veterinarian thinks that you have the potential of not only succeeding in veterinary school, but beyond that as a potential future colleague. It's very clear to anyone applying to vet school that a strong letter of recommendation can really elevate your application. And this is why we got to take this seriously when we're applying. When you're starting to think about your letters of recommendation for vet school, the first thing that you have to ask is, who is the best person to ask to write this letter of recommendation? Is it a veterinarian, a professor? Is it a specific large animal or small animal vet? Is it someone that has maybe been your research mentor? This is something that is really going to be up to the individual applicant and obviously can vary widely. Personally, I asked one of my professors that I worked with as a TA in an animal science class. I did one professor that I had done research with, which this was another way for me to show kind of how I was well-rounded, because this was someone that I did actually human research with. I did not do anything related to vet med with this person, so he was more able to speak to me just as a well-rounded individual in the research realm. And then I asked 2 veterinarians that I had worked with closely. And we're going to talk more about this later, but it's important that if you are going to ask 4 people, which I ended up asking, you have a good relationship with all of them. You're not just asking for extra letters of recommendation that you don't need just from people that you don't have a good relationship with. It's quality over quantity for sure. As we all know, you need to have at least 1 veterinarian, so make sure that that is your top priority, and hopefully these are people that know you well. Something that a lot of people wonder is, what if you've only known someone for a short time? Can you still ask them for a letter of recommendation? Absolutely, you can, but you have to be intentional. Something that often comes to mind regarding this is if you're doing some type of intensive summer program somewhere and you are thinking that at the end of that summer, maybe it's right before you send in your vet school applications, is that enough time for them to really see you and write you a good letter of recommendation? I think that this can absolutely work if you start that experience by directly expressing to them that you would like them to write you a letter of recommendation by the end of the summer, if that is your goal. Or even saying, next summer, I plan to apply to vet school and I'll be following up with you in May to ask if you would be willing to write me a letter of recommendation. Obviously, the longer they know you, the better, but having a letter of recommendation from someone you did an intensive summer program with can absolutely be valuable to your application. So don't discount that person if you think that they're going to be able to add value to your application. Just be clear with them. Maybe at the beginning of that experience, say that that's something that you're looking to gain out of the experience, and then obviously go from there. Now, I've already touched on this, but obviously building relationships before you ask is very important, unless you're in that situation where you're in a summer program and maybe you start the program by saying, hey, I'd really appreciate if you would be willing to just watch me through the summer. I'd love to work with you closely and demonstrate my skills. By the end of the summer, I'm really looking to have a letter of recommendation from you. But in the case where you don't have that type of intensive program, you want to focus on building that relationship early with someone before you ask them for a letter of recommendation. Something you should ask yourself is, how can I become memorable to this person? Some quick examples of how you can become memorable: show initiative. Show up early and make sure that you always do what your job is asking of you, and find little ways to stand out. Maybe that's going above and beyond for a client. Maybe that's showing care to an animal that's really in distress. Doing those little things can really help you stand apart. Follow through on your commitments. If you tell your boss or someone on your team that you're going to do something, make sure to do it. When you don't follow through on those commitments, it makes you look like you're unreliable, and that is not something that you want to be remembered for. As I mentioned, definitely go the extra mile wherever you can. Some quick examples of how I did this before asking for letters of recommendation. I, for one example, TA'd an intro horse handling class during COVID in college, and this was obviously very difficult. We only had a few horse handling labs because we all had to remain socially distanced, and we only had a few teaching horses that we could use. So during those labs, I actually took photos of all the students and shared it with them after the fact. Of course, only with their permission and things like that. I didn't post them anywhere. I just kind of put together a little photo album of everyone during this lab and then shared it with them after. And the students really appreciated that during what was a really difficult time. Just being able to see pictures of them and their horses while we were all socially distanced was something that I think really meant a lot to them, and was just one way that I was able to go the extra mile for those students. And I think that that really demonstrated to the professor that I was working with that I cared about teaching and was able to do something a little extra special to help them during a really difficult time. Another example of this is when I started working as a veterinary assistant at my local small animal practice. I went the extra mile by always offering to stay late to help with after-hours procedures. Now, obviously, not everyone has the opportunity to do this because maybe you're in a practice that doesn't do after-hours procedures, but maybe you hear the veterinarians complaining about a place in the clinic that is extra disorganized and you offer to organize it. Those little things can really set you apart. Something that I also did was not only did I offer to stay late, I offer to stay late and clock out. This is important because I wanted my veterinarian to know that I was willing to stay late and help out and not be paid because I simply wanted to learn, I wanted to observe, I wanted to be helpful, and I just wanted to stay involved. And I think that that was something that I never really thought she noticed until I had gone to ask her for a letter of recommendation. She said to me, "I know that you have consistently stayed late and offered to help." And I realized that she actually had noticed that I was doing that. So it was very clear that doing that consistently over time really allowed her to see more of my character and see that, I wasn't just there for the money. I wanted a good experience, and really allowed her to write me a really good letter of recommendation. Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty of how to actually ask someone for a letter of recommendation. I wish someone had sat me down and talked to me about how to do this, because let me tell you, looking back, I remember how anxious I was to ask the people that I had selected for letters of recommendation. I was so anxious because I knew that they had all helped me so much in my journey. I felt like I was inconveniencing them, and I didn't want to be that person. But obviously, this is a really important skill, and it really pushed me outside my comfort zone. So hopefully these little tips and tricks will help you guys. First, I want you to think about some questions that you should ask yourself. First, is this something you want to do over email or in person? If you want to do it in person, that may require you to schedule a meeting, so you want to put some thought into that. Second question you should ask yourself is, how much notice should I give? This obviously depends on what you're asking the letter of recommendation for. If you're asking for vet school, typically that's going to be the VMCAS deadline, which is in September, so you want to ask a few months before that. Then you might want to ask yourself, what information should I provide? Does this individual know me super well? Are they trying to get to know me? Will they need my resume? If that's something that you think the person you are asking is going to want, make sure you have your resume or your CV ready to go and not on the back burner that you have to go and redo when that person asks you for it. You want to have that ready to go before they ask you. And then lastly, ask yourself, how can I ask someone to write me a strong letter of recommendation? No matter who you ask or how you decide to approach it, it's very important that you ask them to write you a strong recommendation. This signals to them that if they don't feel confident enough in their knowledge about you or your clinical skills, or if they just don't feel comfortable writing you a strong recommendation letter, you're essentially giving them an out. Because you don't want just any letter of recommendation. You want a strong letter of recommendation that's going to set you apart from other applicants. Otherwise, you don't want it. So you want to be clear with them when you're asking what you're asking for. So to go into a little bit more detail, if you choose to ask someone in person, again, you want to have all your ducks in a row. Maybe that doesn't mean that you bring a physical resume, or maybe it does. But maybe it means that you sit down and take some time to gather your resources and determine your deadline, not only the deadline of what you're applying for, but also when you want to ask this person. And then consider what is the best way to ask them. Maybe that means setting up a meeting. And if you are planning to set up a meeting, that means you got to send them an email or talk to them in person beforehand. You want to schedule that all out so that when you are actually going to ask them, that's going to occur a few months before the deadline, so that you have plenty of time and give them plenty of heads up to write a letter of recommendation. For me personally, I wasn't really in a situation with my veterinarians to schedule a meeting. This was something that I knew I was probably going to ask after hours when things had finished up for the day, and I wanted to make sure that it was at the right time. Now, something I really struggled with during this was figuring out what the perfect time to ask them was, especially because I was working in an extremely busy small animal practice where it really felt like no time was the right time. So I actually had to set a short deadline for myself, saying I need to ask this person by this date, and that really eventually pushed me to try and find the best time, but also prevented me from putting it off too much. So obviously you need to feel out your individual situation, especially if you're going to ask them in person. Ideally, you schedule a meeting, and then when you go to the meeting, you have all the information you want to give them, and you have a good conversation with them about it. When you go to ask, if you're asking in person, make sure that you start by saying, "Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me," and then you can go into confidently asking them for a strong letter of recommendation. Obviously, starting by thanking them is a nice way to ease them into the conversation and show that you're really appreciative of their time and know that you're going to be asking them for something very significant. If you're going to ask for a scholarship letter of recommendation, obviously different than a letter of recommendation for veterinary school, make sure you offer to send them the details of the scholarship in a follow-up email, or maybe bring those details in person. You also may want to say, "I've really had the privilege of working with you over the past few years and believe you can speak to blank clinical skill or organization, ethics." If you have a specific thing that you're really trying to get out of this specific letter of recommendation, make sure to add that in when you're asking. And then obviously, and this is one of the most important parts, clearly state the deadline and what the recommendation is for. They're going to want to know how much time they have to write this letter, so you want to be very clear with that and state that early when you're asking them. And then obviously, if you're in person, you're going to wait for a response, and this is one of the hardest parts. Hopefully you'll be reading their body language, hopefully they're engaged with you, they're smiling, they're feeling excited for you, and they're willing to write you a letter of recommendation. If they are unwilling to write you an LOR, be sure to still thank them for their time. I know it can be hard and it doesn't happen often, but sometimes people don't feel comfortable writing you an LOR and they may say no, but we still want to remain respectful and courteous to them and thank them for their time. Now, switching gears, if you're sending an email, make sure to proofread it beforehand. I know it seems obvious, but you don't want to go to that employer asking them for a letter of recommendation with spinach in your teeth. And if you are sending them an email with typos in it, that's kind of a similar thing. You want to be presenting your most professional and best front so that they are most likely to answer with a strong yes. Additionally, you want to have all the materials attached. So if you are going to send an email, make sure you have the resume attached. If it's a scholarship, make sure to send the details in the email. Obviously, be clear what the recommendation is for. Hopefully vet school, maybe it's a scholarship. That should be clearly outlined in the email. Don't forget to say the deadline, and then obviously conclude the email by thanking them. And one thing I want to mention here is if you do choose to send them an email, which I had to do for 2 of my individuals that I asked for a letter of recommendation because they were at college and were not nearby me, so I could not go in person. But you may need to follow up with that person over email multiple times, and that is okay. The people that we are asking are often super, super busy, and so we want to be respectful of that and understand that if they don't respond to your first email, that does not mean that they are saying no. It just means that they have a lot on their plate and maybe they haven't gotten around to your email, or maybe it got lost because they get so many emails. So please, feel free to follow up multiple times. Now, you're probably wondering, Grace, how many times can I follow up? When should I give up? How often can I follow up? I think a good rule of thumb is once or twice a week for a couple of weeks. So say you send the first email on a Monday. Maybe the following Monday, send them another follow-up email. If they don't follow up on that Monday, maybe send them an email on Friday. Do that for a couple weeks so that you're not harassing them every single day, but you are sending them a few emails just to see if maybe it got missed. After, I would say 3 weeks, if you don't hear back from them, maybe that person is not the best individual to write you a letter of recommendation. And obviously you don't want to wait too long, because when you find that alternate person that you asked for a letter of recommendation, you want to make sure they have enough time to write you a strong recommendation letter. Same thing, if the person responds and they are unwilling to write you an LOR, be sure to still thank them for their time. We appreciate when someone says no because they don't feel confident to write you a strong LOR. That's what we're looking for. That is the goal. And that is what I truly believe will help you get into veterinary school. So to conclude, let's go over what I'm going to call the 5 C's of letters of recommendation. This is a nice way to just wrap up everything we just talked about and hopefully give you an easy way to remember how to ask for a letter of recommendation. The first C is choose wisely. Obviously, you want to choose someone who knows you well and can speak to your character, your work ethic, your potential as a veterinary student, or your potential as a future veterinarian. You want to ask yourself, have I worked closely enough with them? Can they provide specific examples about me? And would they be excited to recommend me? Will they write me a strong letter of recommendation? Something that I also want to advise you of is if this person is really interested in writing you a letter of recommendation, but maybe they don't know you super well, offer to take them to lunch. Have a conversation with them outside the clinic or outside the workplace. See if you can get to know them better. See if you go along and show them your resume, they feel more confident writing you a letter of recommendation. I love this idea too, because if you have a meeting with them, you can also get really specific on what you're looking for them to write in your LOR. If you want them to speak to your clinical competence because you're asking a veterinarian, make sure to state that in that meeting. Overall, choose wisely. A strong letter from someone who knows you well is always going to be better than a generic letter from someone that you don't know very well. The second C is communicate early. You obviously want to give your recommender plenty of notice. This gives them the most time to write you what kind of letter of recommendation? A strong letter of recommendation. If you have to ask someone last minute, that's probably going to create unnecessary stress and may result in a weaker letter, and we don't want that. So for vet school applications, a good rule of thumb is 1 to 3 months. For vet school scholarships, you want to give several weeks or as much notice as possible. For me, currently, as I'm applying for jobs, some of them I've only been able to give a month notice or a little bit more than that, but again, as much notice as possible. The third C is be clear. Make it easy for your recommender to say yes because there's no gray area. You want to clearly explain what you're applying for, why you're asking them specifically, the deadline, and what materials you'll provide to make it more accessible to them to write you a letter of recommendation. The fourth C is be courteous. Always ask them if they would be willing to write you a letter of recommendation. This is not an obligation. You're asking them for a favor. You want to stay humble and respectful. Don't say, I need you to write me a letter of recommendation or something like that. That is not courteous, it's not respectful, and is probably not going to yield the results you're looking for. In addition to being courteous when you're asking, you want to be courteous in thanking them, whether they say yes or no. You want to follow up professionally and let them know the outcome, whether you received the scholarship or not, whether you got into vet school or not. You want to let them know the outcome and thank them for their time. Something that I did after my veterinarians and the other professors wrote me letters of recommendation is I wrote them all handwritten notes and mailed that to them. Since I was still working at my clinic, I brought those notes in person to the clinic, and I also went to a local bakery and I got one of their favorite desserts, not only for them but to share with all of the clinic staff, and that was a huge hit. You all know that those desserts hit different on a busy day in the practice, so I think they really appreciated that, in addition to a nice handwritten note. The fifth C is be confident. This is one that I feel like a lot of us struggle with. I have to say that when I went to ask one of the veterinarians that I was working with for an LOR, it was one of the most intimidating things I've ever done. She is such a good veterinarian, so well respected. I knew that she would write me a good LOR, and I had worked with her for quite some time, but I was still scared that she would reject me and say no. So if you're feeling that way, you're not alone. It's completely normal to feel that. Remember, though, that if you've been working hard and trying to set yourself apart and going above and beyond, you have earned the opportunity to ask. You haven't earned the opportunity to actually have an LOR because you are not entitled to that, but you have every right to ask someone who you think would write you a good letter of recommendation. Most veterinarians also, and most professors, really enjoy helping motivated students. So I think that it's really a full circle moment for them, because when we ask for an LOR, a lot of them will think of maybe a mentor or someone that helped them by writing them an LOR. So it's really an opportunity for them to give back, and I've been so surprised by how overjoyed people have been to write me LORs. One way to help increase your confidence is remember, what is the worst that can happen? They're going to say no. And if they say no, you're going to move on and you're going to ask the next person. It's not going to be the end of the world. So be humble and be confident at the same time. And then a bonus C, the sixth C, is credentials. Before you start thinking about asking for an LOR, make sure you've got all your ducks in a row. You want your resume and CV to be updated. You want the information of the scholarship if you need it. You want to make sure you know the VMCAS deadline. And then, once you have all of those in a row, you're going to be more confident when you ask because you'll have all the information that they're going to need. And obviously, the more context they have, the stronger the letter is going to be. Lastly, let's go over quick 6 things to avoid when asking for an LOR. First one, pretty obvious, you want to avoid asking too late. Too late, too much stress, not going to be a strong letter of recommendation. Number 2, avoid asking someone who barely knows you. Obviously, that is not conducive to a strong LOR. Number 3, avoid not providing the materials or having to scramble for them because it's too late and you don't have those materials already ready to go when they ask you for them. Number 4, failing to get the appropriate email address. I want to touch on this quickly, but when you ask for the LOR, you need to ask them for their email address and make sure it's correct. Because especially for applying to vet school, you're going to have to put that into VMCAS so that they can then upload it to some portal, I believe. So make sure you have the correct email address. When you go to ask them, make sure you get that information. Number 5, avoid not following up. Say that you finally ask someone and you have the courage to get that LOR and they say they're going to do it. Make sure you follow up with them. A lot of these people are extremely busy, so if you're asking months in advance, maybe follow up every single month. Don't wait until the deadline to start harassing them. Make sure you remind them a couple months out, a month out, 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out. Remind them once a week if it's necessary until they do it. You should be able to see on VMCAS if they have actually sent it in. So you want to make sure you're monitoring that. I know it can be difficult to follow up, but we need to do this because if they have agreed to write the letter, then they should follow through on their commitment, just like we should, and write the letter. And that may require some reminders, and that is okay because they are busy people, and a few reminders is going to be okay. And then lastly, don't forget to say thank you. So simple, just a great way to continue what is hopefully going to be a strong partnership between you and the people that write you those letters. Something simple is completely adequate. A handwritten thank you card, going to your local bakery, getting them a gift card to their favorite store, whatever it is, something small that shows that you're truly grateful for their time and their effort in recommending you for veterinary school. So that's an overview of how to ask for an LOR, not only for vet school, but also beyond. So I hope that was helpful. Feel free to leave a comment below with any suggestions you might add, but I hope that was helpful, and I really enjoyed talking to you all about this very important topic when it comes to veterinary school. Well, that's all for now, so until next time, my name is Grace Gaynor, and I am scrubbing out. That's a wrap for today's episode of Scrubbed In, the DVM Journey. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of our community of future vets and animal lovers. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. It helps others find the show and join the conversation. And if you have any questions or topics you'd love to hear about, feel free to leave us a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep scrubbing in, and remember, the journey to becoming a DVM is one step at a time.